When you think of pirates, you probably picture bearded men with eye patches and parrots ruling the seas with masculine brutality. But there were women among them, fierce captains who commanded fleets and struck terror into merchant vessels across the Caribbean. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about their fate when captured. The story you're about to hear isn't just about execution. It's about a systematic campaign of degradation designed specifically for women who dared to defy not just the law, but the very nature of their gender in the eyes of 18th century society. The year was 1721, and the streets of Spanish town Jamaica echoed with the cries of merchants hawking sugar and rum, the clatter of horse hooves on sun-baked dirt roads. But on this November morning, a different sound would soon fill the air. The roar of a bloodthirsty crowd gathering to witness what would become one of history's most disturbing displays of gendered justice. The women they came to see judged were Anne Bonny and Mary Read, the most notorious female pirates of the golden age of piracy. What transpired in that courtroom and the cells beneath it was not merely justice, but a carefully orchestrated theater of sexual humiliation designed to destroy not just their bodies, but the very idea that women could wield power on the high seas. Before you continue, make sure to subscribe to hear more dark histories that have been buried by time. The popular imagination, shaped by Hollywood romance and adventure novels, has sanitized the fate of female pirates into something almost noble. A quick hanging beside their male counterparts, equality in death, if not in life. But the reality was far more sinister and infinitely more cruel. Colonial authorities had crafted punishments for captured women pirates that went beyond mere execution, incorporating elements of sexual violence and public degradation that were specifically designed to restore what they saw as the natural order of gender. Today, we strip away the myth and examine the unflinching reality of what happened to women who dared to raise the black flag. To understand the particular horror that awaited captured female pirates, we must first grasp the world that created both them and their punishments. The Caribbean of the early 18th century was a violent frontier where European empires competed for sugar wealth, where enslaved Africans outnumbered free whites by massive margins, and where the line between legitimate privateer and criminal pirate shifted with every new war declaration. In this chaotic world, some women found unprecedented freedom aboard pirate vessels, escaping the suffocating restrictions of colonial society for a life where skill with a cutlass mattered more than adherence to feminine virtue. Anne Bonny had been born in County Cork, Ireland, the illegitimate daughter of a lawyer and his maid. Her family fled scandal to Charleston, South Carolina, where Anne grew into a fierce-tempered young woman with flaming red hair and a reputation for violence. She once allegedly stabbed a servant girl who angered her and beat a would-be suitor so badly he was bedridden for weeks. When she married a small-time pirate named James Bonny against her father's wishes, she was disowned and disinherited, but Anne had already chosen her path. She would later abandon her husband for the charismatic pirate captain Calico Jack Rackham, joining his crew disguised as a man. Mary Read's journey to piracy was even more extraordinary. Born in England to a widow who disguised her as a boy to claim inheritance money from her late husband's mother, Mary spent most of her life presenting as male. She served as a soldier in Flanders, fighting with distinction in cavalry regiments where her true sex remained hidden. After her soldier husband died, she sailed for the West Indies, where her ship was captured by pirates. Rather than accept the traditional fate of captured women, rape and slavery, Mary convinced the pirates she was a man and joined their crew. She would maintain this disguise even among Rackham's crew, with only Anne Bonny and eventually Rackham himself knowing her true identity. These women didn't simply sail with pirates, they fought with a savagery that shocked even hardened buccaneers. Witnesses would later testify that Anne and Mary were among the fiercest fighters in Rackham's crew, cursing and swearing like sailors and showing no mercy to captured merchants. They dressed in men's clothing, canvas jackets and long trousers, with pistols and cutlasses at their sides. But they also reportedly revealed their breasts before battle, taunting enemies with the knowledge that they would be bested by women. This deliberate gender transgression, this mockery of masculine military prowess, would later be used to justify the particular cruelties inflicted upon them. The beginning of the end came in October 1720, when Governor Nicholas Laws of Jamaica commissioned Captain Jonathan Barnett to hunt down Rackham's crew. The pirates were anchored off Negril Point, celebrating their latest prize with stolen rum, when Barnett's sloop appeared. What followed was not the glorious battle of pirate legend, but a pathetic display of drunken cowardice. According to trial records, most of Rackham's men were too intoxicated to fight, hiding below deck as Barnett's crew approached. Only Anne Bonny and Mary Read remained on deck, firing pistols and swinging cutlasses at the boarders, screaming at their crewmates to come up and fight like men. Mary Read reportedly became so enraged at the crew's cowardice that she fired her pistols down into the hold, where the men cowered, killing one and wounding several others before the ship was taken. Anne Bonny's last free act was to strike down 2 of Barnett's sailors with her cutlass before being overwhelmed. The women's fierce resistance, while their male counterparts surrendered without dignity, would become a central point in their trial, used both to demonstrate their unnatural masculine aggression and to humiliate the captured men. The journey from Negril Point to Spanish Town Prison was itself a form of punishment designed specifically for the captured women. While male pirates were simply chained in the hold, Anne and Mary were subjected to what court records delicately refer to as thorough searches, multiple times daily. These invasive examinations, supposedly to ensure they weren't concealing weapons, were performed by male guards in full view of other prisoners. The women were stripped of their men's clothing and forced to wear thin linen shifts that barely covered their bodies. A deliberate humiliation for women who had claimed masculine power through their dress. Guard reports from the Spanish Town Prison, preserved in Jamaica's colonial archives, describe how Anne and Mary were housed not with other female prisoners, but in cells specially constructed in the courthouse basement. These cells had bars facing the main corridor, allowing anyone who paid the jailer's fee to view the captured she-pirates like animals in a menagerie. Colonial gentlemen and their wives would pay to gawk at these women who had violated nature itself, often bringing their children to see what happened to females who forgot their proper place. The trial of Anne Bonny and Mary Read began on November 16, 1721, but the verdict was predetermined. Sir Nicholas Laws, presiding as judge, had already written to London describing them as monsters of nature who had unsexed themselves through their crimes. The prosecution presented witness after witness, many of them captured merchants who testified not just to piracy, but to the particular horror of being robbed and threatened by women. One merchant, Thomas Dillon, testified that Mary Read had held a pistol to his head while cursing in a most unwomanly manner, and that she had exposed her breasts to prove she was female, adding insult to his emasculation. What the official trial records don't fully capture, but what private letters and diary entries from attendees reveal, was the sexual nature of many questions posed to the women. They were asked about their relationships with crew members, whether they had played the whore aboard ship, and most humiliatingly, whether they had known each other in the biblical sense. The court's obsession with their sexuality reveals the true nature of the trial. This was not just about piracy, but about punishing women who had claimed male privileges and rejected feminine submission. The women's defense was handicapped from the start. They were not allowed legal counsel, and as women, their testimony carried less weight than male witnesses. When Mary Read attempted to explain that she had only turned pirate after being captured and threatened with rape, Judge Laws dismissed this as the common excuse of a harlot caught in sin. Anne Bonny's attempt to claim she had been forced into piracy by Rackham was undermined by witnesses who testified to seeing her fighting more fiercely than any man. The narrative the court wanted was clear. These were not victims, but willing participants who had chosen to abandon their feminine nature for a life of masculine violence. But then came the revelation that would temporarily save them from the noose. When the death sentence was pronounced, both women declared themselves quick with child, invoking the common law protection against executing pregnant women. The court ordered them examined by a panel of matrons, respectable women of Spanish Town, who would determine if the pirates were truly pregnant. This examination, conducted in the courthouse with male officials present to ensure no deception, involved invasive procedures that multiple sources describe as deliberately brutal. The matrons were encouraged to be thorough in their examination, understanding that finding these women pregnant would delay but not prevent their eventual execution. The examination confirmed both women were indeed pregnant, granting them temporary reprieve. But this reprieve came with its own particular torments. Pregnant female prisoners in Jamaica were subjected to a regime designed to ensure the safe delivery of the child, who was innocent of the mother's crimes, while punishing the mother for her transgressions. Anne and Mary were placed in special cells with barely enough food to sustain pregnancy, their legs shackled to prevent any possibility of inducing miscarriage. They were examined weekly by male physicians who documented not just their physical condition, but their moral degradation, these reports being circulated among colonial officials as a kind of pornographic moral instruction. Here's where the historical record becomes murky, and where the true horror of their fate may have been deliberately obscured. Mary Read's death in prison, officially recorded as fever in April 1721, came suspiciously soon after giving birth. Prison records show she was examined by 3 different doctors in her final days, unusual for a common prisoner. A letter from a prison guard to his wife, discovered in private family papers centuries later, hints at something darker. The pirate woman read expired this morning after great suffering, her body bearing marks that fever alone could not explain. The child was taken immediately, though it too seemed unlikely to survive what had been done. What exactly had been done? Colonial authorities had developed specific punishments for women who transgressed gender boundaries, punishments that were often sexual in nature, but rarely recorded in official documents. The practice of breaking rebellious women through systematic rape was common in Caribbean slave colonies, and there's evidence suggesting similar methods were applied to female criminals who showed masculine defiance. A Spanish town magistrate's private journal, not discovered until the 1970s, contains a cryptic entry. The Read woman has been corrected in the manner reserved for those who forget their sex. She will birth the child if she survives, but she will never again claim to be the equal of men. Anne Bonny's fate is even more mysterious. Official records simply state she was reprieved from execution after giving birth, with no further mention of her in colonial documents. But irregular payments in the Jamaica Treasury records to certain prison guards for special duties regarding the Bonny woman continued for 3 years after her supposed release. A fragment of a letter from Governor Laws to the Board of Trade in London, partially burned and only recently reconstructed, mentions the continuing correction of the female pirate and assures that she serves as an example to all women who might harbor similar unnatural ambitions. Contemporary accounts from Spanish Town residents speak of a red-haired woman, sometimes seen in chains, cleaning the courthouse under heavy guard, her face bearing scars that hadn't been mentioned in trial records. Was this Anne Bonny, sentenced to a living death as a public example, One witness, writing decades later, claimed to have seen a woman matching Anne's description being forced to watch the execution of other pirates, while guards reminded the crowd that this was what became of women who thought themselves men. The woman never spoke, the witness wrote, but her eyes contained a fury that seemed barely human. The official narrative claims Anne Bonny was released to her father's custody, returning to Charleston to live quietly until her death. But no record of her exists in Charleston after 1721. Her supposed gravesite has never been found. The few historians who've investigated find the story of her release suspicious, noting that colonial authorities would never have simply freed such a notorious criminal. More likely, they suggest, she was subjected to a punishment so degrading that officially recording it would have reflected poorly on British justice, even by the brutal standards of the 18th century. What we do know from multiple sources is that both women were subjected to medical experiments during their imprisonment. Colonial physicians, fascinated by what they saw as the women's hybrid nature, conducted examinations to determine if their bodies showed physical signs of their masculine corruption. These examinations, described in medical journals with clinical detachment, involved procedures that would today be recognized as torture. Doctors searched for enlarged clitorises, which they believed indicated masculine tendencies, unusual body hair patterns, and any anatomical differences that might explain the women's unnatural behavior. The treatment of Anne Bonny and Mary Read established precedents for dealing with female pirates that would persist throughout the colonial period. A secret manual for colonial governors, fragments of which survive in British Admiralty archives, outlined specific procedures for captured women pirates. They were to be separated from male prisoners immediately, subjected to invasive searches, displayed publicly in humiliating conditions, and if pregnant, used as breeding stock before execution. The manual explicitly states that the female pirate poses a greater threat to colonial order than her male counterpart, as her very existence challenges the natural hierarchy upon which civilization depends. The Caribbean colonies developed what they called correction houses, specifically for women who showed masculine tendencies, whether through piracy, rebellion, or simply refusing to submit to male authority. These institutions, which operated until the 19th century, used techniques pioneered on captured female pirates. Women were stripped of their names, referred to only by numbers, forced to wear deliberately sexualized clothing that emphasized their biological femininity while denying them dignity, and subjected to therapeutic violations designed to remind them of their proper role. The story of Anne Bonny and Mary Read has been romanticized over centuries, transformed into tales of feminist rebellion and swashbuckling adventure. But the reality of their capture and punishment reveals the specific horrors reserved for women who stepped outside their prescribed roles in colonial society. The systematic sexual violence, medical torture, and psychological degradation they faced was not incidental, but carefully designed to restore gender hierarchy through the complete destruction of female agency. What makes their treatment particularly chilling was its bureaucratic nature. This wasn't mob violence or individual sadism, but state-sanctioned gender terrorism, documented in triplicate and justified through legal precedent. Colonial officials wrote detailed reports on the effectiveness of various punishment methods, comparing notes across Caribbean colonies on how best to break women who claimed masculine power. These documents, long hidden in colonial archives, reveal an organized system of gendered violence that extended far beyond simple execution. The fate of female pirates' children adds another layer of horror to this story. Those who survived birth were immediately taken from their mothers and placed in colonial orphanages where they were raised with no knowledge of their parentage. Records show at least 3 children born to captured female pirates in Jamaica between 1720 and 1725, all registered as infant of unknown origin and given new names. These children were often indentured to wealthy families, their labor sold to pay for their mother's imprisonment. One boy, possibly Mary Read's son, appears in records as dying at age 4 from corrections applied too liberally by his master. Perhaps most disturbing is how the treatment of captured female pirates influenced broader colonial policies toward women. The techniques developed to punish Anne Bonny and Mary Read were adapted for use on enslaved women who showed resistance, indigenous women who refused conversion, and even white women who challenged their husband's authority. The female pirate became a boogeyman used to justify increasingly severe restrictions on all women's freedom of movement, dress, and association. Colonial laws specifically cited the pirate women of Jamaica as examples of what happened when females were allowed too much liberty. The impact extended beyond the Caribbean. Reports of female pirates' punishments were circulated throughout the British Empire as instruction manuals for dealing with rebellious women. In India, colonial administrators cited the Jamaica precedents when developing punishments for women involved in anti-colonial resistance. In Australia, female convicts who showed masculine defiance were subjected to treatments explicitly modelled on those applied to Anne Bonny and Mary Read. The female pirate became a global symbol of gender transgression that justified systematic violence against women across the empire. Modern historians have only recently begun to uncover the full extent of sexual violence used against captured female pirates. Many documents were deliberately destroyed or hidden, considered too explicit even for classified colonial archives. Others were written in code or euphemism, requiring careful interpretation to understand their true meaning. What emerges from this research is a picture of systematic gender-based torture that goes far beyond anything depicted in popular culture. The few female pirates who escaped capture often did so by returning to conventional feminine roles, but they carried psychological scars that revealed themselves in unexpected ways. Catherine Harley, who sailed with pirates for 2 years before escaping to Virginia, spent the rest of her life unable to wear women's clothing without experiencing panic attacks. She lived as a recluse, dressing in men's clothes despite threats of arrest, until her death 30 years later. Her diary, discovered in the 1980s, describes nightmares of being corrected and a persistent fear that authorities would discover her past and subject her to the fate of Anne and Mary. The colonial authorities' obsession with female pirates reveals deep anxieties about gender, power, and social order that persist today. The specific cruelties inflicted on these women were not just about punishment, but about reinforcing a worldview where female agency itself was seen as an existential threat. Every violation, every humiliation, every carefully documented degradation was designed to prove that women who claimed power would be forced back into submission through their bodies' vulnerability. What happened to captured female pirates forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how societies police gender boundaries through violence. The transformation of Anne Bonny and Mary Read from feared pirates to broken examples reveals how systematically patriarchal power structures will mobilize to destroy women who challenge them. Their story isn't one of romantic rebellion, but of institutionalized sexual terrorism disguised as justice. The gradual uncovering of these historical truths has been met with resistance from those who prefer sanitized narratives of pirate adventure. Museums and tourist sites in the Caribbean continue to present romanticized versions of female pirate stories, avoiding the documented horrors of their capture and punishment. Even academic historians have been reluctant to fully explore the sexual violence aspects, leading to generations of scholarship that perpetuates comfortable myths rather than confronting disturbing realities. As we examine the fate of captured female pirates, we must ask ourselves why these stories were hidden for so long and what other historical truths about women's punishment remain buried in archives, too disturbing for mainstream historical narratives. The treatment of Anne Bonny and Mary Read wasn't exceptional but exemplary, designed to teach lessons about gender and power that colonial authorities wanted remembered, even as they hid the specific methods behind euphemism and classification. The blood-soaked cells of Spanish Town prison echo still with questions that colonial records can't quite answer. What exactly happened to Anne Bonny after her child was born? Why did Mary Read die so suddenly after giving birth, her body bearing those mysterious marks the guard couldn't explain? And perhaps most haunting of all, how many other women suffered similar fates, their stories completely erased because they lacked even the notorious fame that preserved some record of Anne and Mary's existence? Were the colonial authorities simply punishing criminals according to the harsh standards of their time, or were they conducting a deliberate campaign of gender terrorism, using captured female pirates as laboratories for developing techniques to control all women who might dare to claim autonomy? The fragments of evidence that survive suggest the latter, but the full truth remains locked in documents that were destroyed, memories that were silenced, and bodies that were made to disappear after serving their purpose as examples. The real horror of what they did to captured women pirates may be that we'll never know the full extent of it, only that what we do know is enough to challenge every romanticized tale of pirate adventure we've ever been told. Subscribe now to uncover more dark truths from history that have been deliberately hidden from the mainstream narrative.